Well, good morning, everyone. We are here again with the four amigos, the four consulting amigos. That's Ray Anderson, John Mills, Ed Lasak, and myself. We're also here on behalf, doing expert topics on behalf of MicroGiants, where we bring a program of a bunch of old salts together with a subject about small business. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about regulation, and in a broader sense, and specifically regulation in California. Since California seems to lead, I hesitate to use the word lead, but they're first in creating legislation that is very tough on business. And I believe in another one of our shows, when we took a look at the ranking, California came in about 49th in the country in terms of difficulty doing business. It was New York or New Jersey or somebody who was 50th, but I mean, California ranks at the very bottom for difficulty of trying to do business. And then at the same time, the economy is worse off here. This the second or the worst unemployment rate in the country, in a time when the country is doing unbelievably well. We're doing less well, and that's partially because we had 800,000 people leave in the last 2-3 years that went to good jobs in other states, and we've had, I don't know how many companies, but a lot of people leave. So there is a little bit of a backlash to the regulation. Whether or not that makes any difference to the future of the state and how fast it's still growing, apparently, but not really sure. But because we have a lot of microgiants in California, it's important to try and figure out how to get through some of these regulations, pay attention to the regulations. They're building hundreds of these every single year. I mean, they pass hundreds of laws every single year up in Sacramento, and and quite a few of them actually have to do with small business in one way or another. We're gonna focus on a couple of them here today as a way to start a general conversation about the whole issue of regulation and how to deal with it. So Ed is going to talk about the subject of renewed changes to the bereavement laws. So Ed, why don't you fill us in a little bit?
Well, thank you, Ron. Today I want to talk a little bit about new law for this year. It's called Assembly Bill 1949 that was passed into law, and it made some changes to California bereavement policy. And the changes aren't very big, but as Ron indicated, if there's several hundred of these things passed every year, it's really important to understand and comply with them. Otherwise, there are severe penalties if you don't. But in bereavement, the old law in California was you have to offer 3 days of bereavement time off if a family member passed away, and if they were out of state, then you'd have to offer 5 days, 2 extra days, but you have to prove that whoever died was out of state, and you had to go out of state for the funeral arrangements. Now it's just basically 5 days are mandatory, and you can't discriminate. You can't interfere, you can't retaliate. You have to offer this to your employees. And so it's a minor change, but it's one of many changes that has to be made. And probably it's related to the California Family Rights Act that was passed several years ago. And that's part of the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, where basically, and this is big, and this was big when it was passed, you have to offer employees, up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave during any 12-month period for any type of family matters that could arise. And boy, that's if you're running a small business and you have 6 people, And you have these types of requirements for time off. It's pretty difficult to operate a business. So the bereavement change is just on top of that, and it'll probably be changed again. It's not like they're getting extra money. There's no money associated. It's just time. So, but if you have any type of accrued time, they can take that. But it's just basically the time off. But as we all know, when you're running a business, you have requirements you have to get done every day. You need your workforce in place to take care of your business. So that's one of the challenging aspects of it. What's interesting, if you're covered by a union agreement, this law doesn't apply as long as there's something in the union agreement that addresses it. So that's a big difference in a lot of California laws, whether you're a union operation or a non-union operation. Now, what's nice about being under a union operation, you don't have a lot of lawsuits associated with not complying with California law. So that's a big benefit if you're unionized. If you're non-union, you got to make sure you're dealing with all these laws and complying. Otherwise, you got attorneys out there that are willing to take the case to take you to court to get a judgment against you for not complying with these laws. Now, every one of customers I have dealt with over the last 20 years have had some type of wage and hour violation that it cost them at least $500,000 or more as a settlement. So that's a pretty stiff penalty for not complying with the law. So, and the employer has to prove that they're in compliance, which makes it very difficult.
It's not the other way around where you're innocent until proven guilty. That's a little bit of a reversal to what our country was founded on.
Yeah, if you have 100 people and you find one that isn't in compliance, guess what? You're on the hook for not following California law.
And there are so many hundreds of laws that the average small business isn't even aware that there's a change or a law. You have to employ someone to stay on top of this most of the time, just to keep track of what the different. If you have hundreds of laws and you have to read the fine print, and of course you know how tough it is to read government speak. It's obscure, and you don't even know what some of these words mean yet as a small business person because it hasn't been interpreted by the law yet. And so, you make your judgments and you try to do the best you can, but it's so burdensome that the average small business, say 5 employees or smaller, I mean, there's no way they can keep up with these things.
No, that's very true, Ron. They just don't have the resources to do that or the knowledge.
Yeah, so it's very tough, very tough. Okay, any other comments from you guys?
Well, it's a bit of a slippery slope when you have two alternatives. You have the government rules and regulations that year by year try to affect the way you operate the business, and to some extent they're arbitrary. They just come in and there's no dialogue because they happen from on high and they just come down and here it is. 12 weeks is, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 months.
Yeah,
that's 25%. And basically they're taking the opportunity, by doing this, the opportunity for a business to be a good business to work for is diminishing. Used to be that you'd know in the town that you come from, you work for this company because they treat you well. Oh, what's treat you well mean? Well, when you have things when your family has child things going on, they let you go, they do this. It is within the jurisdiction of the company's parameters that you can treat your team well. And so companies do well because they treat people well. But now it's like, you know what, we're going to do the letter of the law because at the end of the day, we're being sliced up. So it seems to me like right now what's happening is the government is coming in as an alternative to the union, and almost to the point that they'll be a little bit more sticky to deal with. So why not become union? either way, the government wins because they have a lot of control in and with the unions. Because in California, that's the biggest voting bloc that is going on, I believe. And so, we're caught between a rock and a hard spot. And small business is actually not a favored place to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit difficult.
Right. And if you're in a restaurant, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but if you happen to be in a business that relies on that local proximity, you can get away with the idea that you can provide a lot more benefits for an employee. But when you compete with somebody else, and like California is competing with other countries and other states, all of a sudden it's just sort of like, well, now I can't compete because it costs me too much to be able to do that competition. So for instance, in a business where you might, entry level workers, you might be able to find somebody to come in and take care of that 3 months. But in this environment where you can't find anybody at all to come in, where does that 25% of a full salary burden end up? Well, it ends up on the employer. The owner is picking up that, or the other 4 people have to pick that up. So that means that everybody else now is paying for your bereavement. You have a sickness and you're gone for 3 weeks. Everybody else is sick with you because they're having to work harder in order to be able to pay for that, because you can't replace these people. So if you're, you can certainly understand how being able to have 12 weeks off if you've had a new baby makes a lot of sense, and that can be a tough trial for any new family. But I just wonder how the rest of us managed to do that. We did it with no leave at all. Maybe we'd take a week off, 2 weeks off. I don't know. How did we manage to live through that? But somehow we all did. And, people can take responsibility for how they're going to do this, where they're going to get, care for childcare, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens in this particular case now is that the law requires you to suck it up and pay up to 90%. And that's the new law includes, you got to pay up to 90%. And so then what the government does is it comes back and says, oh, but you know what? If you apply for it, we will give you some funds in order to be able to retrain that person. What are those funds? $1,000. $1,000 to retrain your skilled person. So now, entry-level people, that's one thing. But now you've got a machine operator who has worked with you for 10 years, and it's an intricate job. Nobody can replace that person because you've got 4 or 5, 6, 7, 10 steps, and people have specialized in order to be efficient and to be able to make something. It's like, there's no way you're going to actually put a strain on that whole business. And
I think there's a big difference between a big business and a small business.
You bet.
The large businesses, they're really not impacted by this because they have a lot of people, and they figure out a way to do it. It's part of, they probably add it to their benefit package, and it's not that big of a deal. But when you got 6 employees and you have 2 or 3 that want to get out for up to 3 months worth of time, that's a big impact on your business.
Oh, it's nearly impossible. I mean, with you if you got one owner who's doing all kinds of other stuff, and you got, say, 4 people, 5, 6 people who are producing, and you take one person out of the mix, boy, I tell you, it is a huge strain. And when you're making 3, 4, 5, 6% net profit, that kind of equals your profit. You're probably, if we could put this to a pencil, and you'd be destroying a large piece of your profit just because one person took 3 months off. And the next year, another person takes another 3 months off. There's only one alternative. You have to raise your prices. And you
Yes.
raise your prices with against a state that doesn't have all of these restrictions or costs. Now you're losing business entirely. That's why people leave. They have to pick their business up, take as many of their people with them, and get the heck out of town because it makes it impossible. Now, I don't think California, you would think this year, after having so many people leave and us losing a congressional representative for the first time since 1850, the very first time, you would think that they would wake up and say, we ought to do something about this. But what they do is they say, you know what, we should help them with their training. If you fill out this long application, if you can find it, and I did find it, and I did read through it. It's not terrible. It will only take you 30, 40 minutes to fill out, and you're going to get $1,000 check. Well, an owner doing that application is worth $1,000 an hour. So what are you spending your time on? Talk about efficiency. So, it's like, we're going to take this big rock away from you, but don't worry, we're going to give you a little stone back to help out. That's the state of California.
I was going to suggest at this point, I think we've put this bereavement thing kind of in perspective. It's certainly harmful to small business. Let's talk about Ed. You had one that you wanted to discuss, or was that you, Ron?
No, I've got one. Yeah, we've got another one, and it's similar. I'm going to talk specifically about this new law, which is AB 257. What it does is that they call it the Fast Recovery Act. It's the very first of its kind. Council of Workers, corporate representatives, franchises, and state officials with a mandate to set the wages for restaurant workers, the working hours and other conditions statewide. Well, we were talking about unions. The unions are going to get control here because that you have to have 2 union people. You've got a state official, 2 state officials and 2 different ones and a couple. So it's stacked against, you've only got 2 employers. And so you add it all up. This law actually puts it really makes the employers sitting on there as stooges because they can't win against these other guys. And so, and anybody who takes on a position like that is probably already ridiculously liberal and just doesn't understand how economics works. But they expect this to push restaurant workers' wages to $22 an hour. Now, by the time they're done, you're going to have more healthcare issues. You're going to have all kinds of other laws that we all know about are already in existence in California that you have to provide. It's not optional. And so you're talking about is it an effective rate of $25, $26, $27? It's going to cost $50,000 for every single worker. And so when you go into McDonald's and they won't take care of you anymore and you have to do it through a computer or your cell phone, that's why. Because they're going to have to get rid of people. They cannot continue to operate by simply having 10 or 15 or 20 people in say one big McDonald's. How in the world can they survive like that? They're going to raise prices and they're going to lower labor. So that's where we're going to be. The only way that I can see that people are going to be able to deal with this is, I hate to even, blow the whistle in a way, but small family-owned restaurants where the family literally are the people who are running it. They're not keeping track of wage and time. Nobody's complaining. The family lives as a result of the family working, but how can they afford to hire anybody? And so they just do the whole thing themselves. That's how you get around this. They'll probably try and stop that as well. But I find that, you're already paying 15, 20 bucks for a burger. And even though it's $6 or $7 or $8 at a fast food restaurant, that's got to go up. It's going to cost more money. So
Is this law, Ron? Has this been passed?
they presented it and it was signed by the governor and it is ready to go through. But fortunately, there are a lot of big chains that are fighting it. And so they're out collecting signatures to put it. It looks like it's going to become a ballot referendum. That's where this is going. So in a way, I guess the referendum has been filed, but it looks as though they'll get the signatures and we will have a vote on it. And so we're going to have a really big, we're going to have a big battle. Chipotle, Yum, Brands, Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out Burger, Jack in the Box, Burger King, they've all joined in saying, wait a minute, we can't go down here. Now they could say, well, we could handle it $22, but what they can't handle is completely allowing some other, effectively a union, to completely and totally control what you're doing for your employees without any bargaining power. Think about that. This takes away what used to be bargaining power with the union. I mean, this forces them, talk about being forced into unionship. That's what this does, is it forces them towards unions. So Ray, you kind of lean towards unions a little bit. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, at some point, I've always been a fan of unions, in part because, that's where my father came from, unlike maybe some of the rest of you. And, I think it's like the old adage by Lord Acton, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think, what's happened is that, the pendulum has swung. And to John's point, here in the state of California, we have these very powerful service unions that drive a lot of legislation. So, anytime you've got too much power in one hand of things happening, it tends to be detrimental to our economy. I was interested in knowing whether we have any statistics about how many small businesses in California, the percentage of small businesses who do business only in the state of California. My guess is that I would imagine a lot of them are simply California only businesses, but I don't know that.
Yeah, I would say when you count restaurants just alone, that's a large percentage of all small businesses in California.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be 50% or upwards from there, maybe even much higher. It's a large percentage, yeah. John, any comments? Turn on your, there we go.
Not on that particular subject. I mean, I think we're in general talking about piece by piece, the powers that be ending up dabbling with and controlling a lot of the existing things that we take for granted. I think the biggest problem as a small business operator is you go into business and there are known obstacles to entry, there are known costs. You work through that, you get your game plan going, and now all of a sudden you get sidelined by 3 or 4 other that arbitrarily come in and rewrite your rule book, and it's completely not within your ability to have any influence on it. And so the barriers to entry of getting in, a lot of people don't want to get into business because it's too unpredictable. And regrettably, I come from a country, New Zealand, that the government changed some laws and rules in major ways back in the 80s that over 50% of small businesses went out of business in a period of 2 or 3 years when import tariffs and things were changed. Since then, it's stabilized a little bit because they took it all off and they let it run relatively without touch since then. But yeah, it's a danger when you start doing these seemingly small things that affect a vast number of people.
John, given
Yes.
that you left because of the socialization of New Zealand, what do you think is going on here? And are the same alarm bells ringing in your head?
Regrettably, yes. I feel like in 1980, when I came here because the entrepreneurial business spirit was a little bit of a can-do attitude. And now that has turned into, if we're allowed, we might be able to do something. And a lot of the smaller businesses are subject to so many pieces of bureaucracy that it's very difficult to be compliant, as we said earlier, with all of the laws and regulations. If you're in property management and property in California, it is interesting because I don't think there's a property that meets all of the code compliant issues if we went into some fine inspections. They all operate. Well, what that ends up meaning is that if somebody decided they want to do a full-blown code inspection on any building anywhere, they could basically shut it down. And in any small town, you'll go in and you'll find all these restaurants set up. And some of them have grandfather and grandmother clauses on them, but you have a look, they don't meet ADA code, 50% of them. The new ones do, but the old ones have basement toilets and up and down stairs that don't meet code. They've got sizes of things that don't meet code. And so we've got to the point where the business owner is actually operating under the grace of the local community, not breathing in on them. And it can be quite dangerous for them to rock the boat on anything. So my alarm bells are ringing very, very loud and clear that we're going down a road where, at the end of the day, to serve and protect was a sign that was on the side of a police car that indicated that they were there to serve and protect we, the citizens and the business owners. Now the concept of serve and protect is they're serving and protecting, regrettably, their retirement plans and the actual wherewithal of the service sector to do well long term. It's flipped. So I view citizenry and small business being underlings to the service sector right now.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, John, about the concept that the rules and regulations are so convoluted and so massive that almost nobody is able to really follow everything to the letter of the law. And of course they change. They're subject to interpretation, and therefore whoever your local enforcer is now effectively, they come into your place of business and they're now effectively a Gestapo kind of agent. I hesitate to use a word that strong, but I don't know what other word fits, because they can, based on their will, determine how much it's going to cost you or what you're going to do this time. Ray and I had a client years ago who made very high pressure custom nozzles for hoses, and she had a long-standing business, and her comment was, every time I see someone from the county, the city, or the state come in, it costs me $10,000. A standing deal. She was there, had been there on a piece of property outside the city in the county, which is a little bit more liberal, and there's a county road that goes in the front of her place, and yes, trucks come and deliver things. And one day, after having visited many times before, the story was, the trucks that leave your property are putting too much mud on the road, too much hot, well, we've had it this way under these circumstances for 20 years, so it's never been a problem before. Why is it a problem now? I don't know. I can't answer that. I'm just saying that you're violating that, and you have to go through your entire 2-acre property and put down gravel immediately, or you'll get fined a lot more than the $10,000 it's going to cost you to do that. Today, that'd be $20,000. So it's like, yeah, you see him come in the door, get out your checkbook, because in her case, she said, we haven't ever had somebody come in and not find something wrong.
Well, I think you just touched on something, Ron. I think the bureaucracies that run all this, they leverage this because it's in their best interest to move these things forward, because it guarantees their job. Yep. And that kind of gets us to think about another challenge for here in California in particular, is how are we going to pay for these retirements? I think we recently said, even in Redlands, 67% of all the police officers are on tax-free returns after a year or two, and they're going to get this retirement for the rest of their life. And that's across the board for anybody who's in the state of California. And I don't quite understand how we're going to continue to be able to carry that burden.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure anybody understands how we're going to carry that burden. There are only a few people who really studied it. I happened to hear a paper by a financial planner who dug into this and spent a lot of time trying to understand it. And it's been a few years ago, but the essence of his paper is that what you see and what we're paying for tends to be known. But what we don't see is what the actual liability of these huge government retirement plans is. And so what tends to happen is that when they make a calculation, and that's just not going to be exact, so just the concept will be right, but the exact numbers may be wrong, what happens then is that they have a target earnings that they promise to the retiree, and they put their funds in whatever mechanisms that there are, the stock market and bonds, et cetera, and supposedly they're dealing with their appropriate fiduciary standards, et cetera. But nobody makes it all the time, and so what happens when they miss that target? Say they plan on a 3% increase, and when they miss the target and it's only 2% increase, they come back to the city or the state, the county, whoever, and they say, so we've got to fund a shortfall. Well, this shortfall happens to be the difference. So that goes into the budget this year. And so what you're doing is that you're going to the citizens and saying, well, we've accounted for in the payroll and the taxes and our set-asides and everything, we've accounted for all of these pensions that we have promised our future retirees to get. But what in fact happens is that it comes back and it gets plugged back in annual increments occasionally into those budgets, blowing the budgets. So when you see somebody blowing a budget and you take a look at, well, how much did you have to contribute to a pension fund that didn't perform? So they get us anyway, and then they raise taxes. So, I mean, they get to us one way or the other. And so what that does is by raising taxes, it makes everybody more efficient. And it's how do you get, raises come from productivity. How do you get productivity out of a whole city or a whole state when you've got a large percentage of your workers who are not working? How do you do that? So that's impossible. But this is something that nobody in government really wants to talk about this.
Actually, a large percentage of your workers are getting paid for not working, but they have taken seconded government jobs and are getting paid for those as well.
That's true, especially in the fire and the police departments, and you see people who you used to see on the street, they've retired at I don't know what age, 50, 55, and now they're your inspector, your building inspector.
Yeah, it's in they're double dipping, so they finished one career at 38 or 40, and then they went on and did another one, and so again, it's unsustainable.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's the right word.
John, you raised an issue about law enforcement, which is interesting because it's another area where we're kind of struggling with how we're going to pay for this.
Yeah, and I think law enforcement in general would be troubled by this new bill, which is SB 960. The bill removes the provision that an individual must be a citizen or a permanent resident of the United States in order to become a police officer. In other words, you can become a police officer if you're an immigrant. The bill makes no distinction between legal and undocumented immigrants. The bill only allows for legal immigrants to become police officers. In the fact, if they're not a resident and they're not a citizen, they can now become a police officer. Now, specifically in California, it is barred by federal law. Federal law comes out and says you cannot be a police officer if you're an illegal immigrant. But the intent of this bypasses that. So I mean, I have a huge problem with this. I am an immigrant to the United States, and I swore an oath and have a passport and believe it is an honor to be part of the United States of America. And therefore, I can be part of the culture that is there. I'm paying taxes and I am contributing and I'm accountable to the legal system. But yet I've got people here who are not citizens and they can become police officers. I don't know how that can be good for police officers in general.
And the irony of all ironies, we just shut down illegal Chinese police operations. Those people are now out of a job. So we should be able to hire these Chinese police officers, right?
So at the core of this, and this is something we don't get into because it's very, very deep, and I don't think it's easy. We all know it's about the intent and the strategy that goes with the way we live. And there's an assumption that if we were born and raised in America and we understand the freedoms that have been fought for by our forefathers, we support that. It's kind of a cultural heritage that we believe in the can-do attitude. We believe in working for a living and treating each other with equality. I mean, that's part of what being an American is. But I think at the end of the day, I don't know that that is being promoted as actively as it should. And I think it should be part of our DNA, our cultural DNA. So there is this cultural DNA. Now, when you allow people to come in with no knowledge of what our cultural DNA is, to become part of the enforcement of the way we live, that is disingenuous. I think a real red flag. So sorry, Ray. Yeah, I do think it's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. And it seems to me that, there's certain roles that we earn. And obviously to become a police officer, it would make sense to me to require that you be either a citizen or somebody who has said that they intend to be here permanently.
Yeah, I've been in a couple of, I've been in Russia for a little bit. And I tell you what, you treat their police officers extremely differently than our police officers. Our police officers here, in general, looking out to make sure that citizenry is taken care of. They're looking out in a protective manner 90% of the time. This is not so in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Russia. You are a target for their scrutiny and can be moved at any time they want.
Right.
Completely different scenario.
Yeah, that's right.
You know who's boss, and it is not we the people.
Well, this has been an interesting discussion. I think maybe a little bit depressing. We've talked about business and regulation before, specifically in California, but it's in time for us to sort of close it out, and we can probably sit here and beat this dead horse. Or no, it's not dead. Problem is, we're not beating a dead horse. This is a racehorse.
It's a runaway racehorse.
Yeah, we're just trying to grab onto its tail, and I'm not sure we've actually accomplished that here today even. But it's a huge problem, and I don't foresee a nice solution. There are going to be a lot of people that will be hurt. There already have been, at least 800,000 people have left and uprooted their homes and gone to places that they didn't know anybody, et cetera. So it's already been a big problem, and it's too bad, but it's the business atmosphere. And until we can get some people of any ilk, any party, to recognize that this is a slowly occurring disaster, nothing is going to really change. But I guess at least small business people still do have freedom in that they can leave. That might be their only freedom, because in business they're told to do almost everything. And when we start getting price and wage controls, that'll be that. They won't be free at all. So,
well, and I was going to add another dimension to this. Obviously regulatory is one thing, but think of the cost of living here, and particularly housing. Here I am in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where my grandnephew bought a 3-bedroom brick house across from a park for $90,000.
Yeah,
And he was able to do that a year after he graduated. My boys will unlikely be able to buy a home in California ever.
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's the scenario, and that's why so many of our children are leaving, is because they missed the boat, they missed the opportunity, and they'll go elsewhere for opportunity. So whether the state believes that they want to keep really hardworking, good people or not, or they'd rather just continually populate it with non-contributing people, I guess Sacramento make a decisions. But it seems to me that 80% of the decisions that are made in Sacramento are pushing us closer to that goal of having no productive people and a whole lot of unproductive people. That's not a scenario for success in any country. So,
Well, I think that's true, Ron. I think the challenge we have is that, since these are all elected officials, obviously something in the electorate, people are voting for their selfish interests. How do we change that? Because as long as that's happening here, we're going to continue to get additional layers of this regulation and not remove it, but it's going to become even more burdensome.
Well, Ray, it's pretty easy here and where we live in the general area. If you want to sit on a city council, if you want to be on any other body, if you have the support of the public sector service unions, teachers, fire, police, you will get elected.
yeah.
And so what's happening is it's very, very simple. The electoral voice is actually slanted by labor. That's who gets in, and that's who gets paid the most.
And those are the people with these pensions that are unrealistic, and
It's a fait accompli. It's done.
Jobs where they can't get fired. I mean, so we've already, yeah. So the issue here is, what's the ratio of thinking independent people to the ratio of people already on the take?
It's going to take a train wreck.
Entities, yeah.
It's going to have to take a train wreck for a city to go bankrupt in order to rearrange that, to dispose of their pension debt if they can, which they can't, and then to rearrange. I mean, that's where it comes.
Yeah. And they haven't learned that, the unions haven't learned this lesson yet. Even in San Bernardino, where they did go bankrupt, they messed around. They came up with a way to keep most of the pensions intact there. And so, they didn't learn the lesson. It's going to take several bankruptcies. It's going to have to be a real issue of chaos, and budgets that don't even get close to, and overspending. I mean, it's going to be nasty in order to get a change. Otherwise, it'll just kind of, go on as it is. And so I guess with that good note, it's probably time to bring it to an end. Maybe we can bring some of these others, these bigger issues up in meetings. So thank you all.
It seems like that this conversation has kind of been a submarine now, hasn't it?
Oh,
Yeah, catastrophic implosion. I tell you what,
That's
sad.
what's going to require.
Very, very sad.
Yeah, sometimes to fix things, you have to have a catastrophic change.
Failure.
That's where we're at. So, all right, thank you all. We'll see you all next week.